Welcome guys to Microcode, and today we are going to learn about Entity Framework Core. So in this video we are going to learn more about Entity Framework Core. So Entity Framework Core is also known as EF Core in a short form. So EF Core is actually the latest version of Entity Framework and completely rewrites from the ground up. So what is an EF Core in general? What is it about? So Entity Framework Core is an ORM. So Entity Framework Core is an ORM, which is Object Relational Mapper framework for data access in .NET. So it was released along with .NET Core and is an extensible, lightweight, open source, cross-platform version of Entity Framework data access technology. So it also works on multiple operating systems like Windows, Mac, and Linux. So when we say Entity Framework Core is an ORM, so what is an ORM? So the term ORM stands for Object Relational Mapper, and it automatically creates classes based on database tables, and vice versa is also true. So what does it mean? So you can be having classes that can translate to database tables, and you can be having a database tables that translates to domain classes. So that is it, and it can also generate the necessary SQL to create the database based on the classes. So as a developer, we most likely work with application business objects, and the ORM framework generates the necessary SQL, that is to perform CRUD operations that the underlying database can actually understand. So in simple words, ORM eliminates the need for most of the data access code that as a developer we actually need to write. So someone might ask, why do we need to use an ORM? So supposing we have to develop an application to manage students of a college, for example. So in order to do this, we'll need to create classes such as students class. We might need to create department class or address class. So technically, we usually refer these as domain classes. So without using ORM framework like Entity Framework or EF Core, so we might need to write lots of data access code to perform the CRUD operations. So that is to store students' details and even to retrieve students' details. For example, to store even the department's details and even to retrieve department details. So in order to perform CRUD operations, that is the read, insert, update, and delete from the database table, we need to write custom code if we will not be using the Entity Framework Core. So we'll be writing custom code in our application to generate the required SQL statement, which can be understood by the database. So again, when we want to read the data from the database into our application, then also we might need to write some custom code to map the database data to our model classes like student, database, the departments, and even like addresses and branches. So these are very common tasks so for developers who are not using Entity Framework Core. So an ORM framework like Entity Framework Core or even Entity Framework can do all of these things instead of us writing the codes, so saving us a lot of time. So if we provide the necessary required information to the ORM framework, then we are good to go. So the ORM framework sits between our application code and the database. So it actually eliminates the need for most of the custom code access code that we can actually write. So we can do away with the custom code and we use ORM to perform all those things. So EF Core development approaches. So it has two development approaches. That is, it supports two development approaches, and one is the code first approach, and the second one is the database first approach. So EFCO mainly targets the code first approach and provides little support for the database first approach currently. So most of the people usually prefer using code first approach. So when we say code first approach, what do we mean? So in the EFCO code first approach, first we need to create our application domain classes, such as the student, or even the branch, or even the address, and a special class that derives from the entity framework DB context class. So we'll be having our domain classes and the DB context class. Then the EFCO will actually map these to our database. So code first approach, we need to create database from the domain classes. We'll have to create our tables from the domain classes. So as you can see from this scenario, the EFCO API creates the database and tables using migration based on the default convention and configuration. So if you want, you can actually change these default conventions to use the database and its related tables. So these are approach usually useful in the domain-driven design, that is the DDD. So what about the database first approach? So our next approach is the EFCO database first approach. So if you have an existing database and database tables are already there, then you need to use the EFCO database first approach. So in the database first approach, the EFCO creates the DB context class and the domain classes based on the existing database schema using the EFCO command. So in the database first approach, we actually have the database and the tables. So what we need to generate, we will only be generating the DB context class and the domain classes. So the EFCO API will now create the database context and the domain classes from the database. So the difference between these two, our code first approach, we actually have the domain classes and the DB context class. So the EFCO API will actually map this now and generate the database and the database tables. But for the database first approach, we have the database and the tables. Then the EFCO API will translate these to DB context and the domain classes. So that is the difference between these two. So the EFCO actually has database providers. So the EFCO supports both relational and non-relational databases. And this is possible due to database providers. So the EFCO supports both the relational and non-relational databases, and this is due to the availability of the database providers. So the database providers are available as what we call nugget packages. So we have the EFCO, and the EFCO to actually be mapped to this database, then we actually use the EFCO database provider. So the EFCO database provider usually contains the functionality specific to the database it supports. So we'll be able to see the different database providers. So the functionality that is common to all the databases is actually provided by the EFCO component. But functionality that is specific to a database, for example, Microsoft SQL Server functionality is within the SQL Server database provider. So just like to give you a snapshot of the database providers. So you can see we have the SQL Server. This is the Nugget for SQL Server, which has the these are the database provider, which has the specific functionality for the SQL Server. So we have MySQL, PostgreSQL, and SQLite, then all these. So we'll be able to see this. So you can actually get these database providers online. So if you just go to your browser, and type in EFCO core database providers on a Microsoft site, So you'll be able to see these database providers. So you can see we have a list. So I'll pin the link of the database providers on the description section. So you can see we have the Nugget packages and the versions and the database that it supports. Then the main vendor and the maintainer, then some nodes that are required. So all these are the Nugget packages. So you can see they are specific to certain databases. So that is it for the database providers. So how do we install these Nugget packages? So how do we use EFCore? How do we install Entity Framework Core in Visual Studio? Some of you might be wondering. So to install Entity Framework Core, it depends with the kind of application that you have. So there is a single layer application and the multi-layer application. So for our demos today, we'll be using the single layer application. But you can chat me below the comments if you will want me to present how you can actually develop a multi-layer application. So the Entity Framework Core can be used with .NET Core applications as well as .NET 4.6 based application. So we'll be going to install EFCore in .NET Core application using Visual Studio 2022. So depending on the project complexity or requirement that you have, or the application that you have, whether it is single layer web application or multi-layer web application. So some of you might be wondering what is a single layer application. So when you develop a small project, then you have the presentation, business, and data access layer all in one project. That is what we refer to as single layer application. Then for the multi-layer application, this is when you develop a large application with 3 layers: presentation layer, business logic layer, and data access layer, implemented as separate projects. So that is what we call as multi-layer application. So multi-layer web application, we have the presentation layer, business logic layer, data access logic layer being handled as separate projects. So in order to install Entity Framework Core, to interact with, so we'll be doing SQL Server database to demonstrate. So in order to install the Entity Framework Core to interact with the SQL Server database, you will need to install the following database providers. That is the Nugget packages. So we have the first package being Microsoft.EntityFrameworkCore.SqL, Microsoft.EntityFrameworkCore.SqL. So the purpose of this package is it is the Nugget package that contains SQL Server specific functionality. Then we have the Microsoft.EntityFrameworkCore.Relational database. So this is the nugget that contains functionality that is common to all relational database. So we have the Microsoft.EntityFrameworkCore.Relation. So this is the nugget package that contains functionality that is common to all relational databases. Then we have the Microsoft.EntityFrameworkCore. So this is actually the package that contains common Entity Framework Core functionality. So these are the 3 main Nugget packages that we are going to use it for SQL Server database. So these Nugget packages has relations. So we don't have to install each of them, all of them at once. So how did this work? So Microsoft Entity Framework Core.SqlServer has a dependency on Microsoft.EntityFrameworkCore.Relation package. So I'll show you how you can see those dependencies. And then the Microsoft.EntityFrameworkCore.Relational also has a dependency on Microsoft.EntityFrameworkCore package. So this package now has the common Entity Framework Core functionality. So when we install Entity Framework Core .SQL Server, this one, the first one, Microsoft.EntityFrameworkCore.SQL Server package, then it also automatically install these others. So it will install this because it has the relations to it. Then this, because it has the relations to this one, it will be installed. So when installing Entity Framework Core, you just install the first package, then the other dependencies will automatically be installed. So what we need to do, I have created an application. So I hope you can see my screen. I've created an application. So for us to install Entity Framework, that is the Nugget packages, you'll click on the solution, then click on Manage Nugget Packages, then come to Browse here. Then on Browse, just type in Microsoft.EntityFrameworkCore, then .SQL. So SQL Server. So you are installing for SQL Server. Good. So this is it. So Microsoft.EntityFrameworkCore.SqlServer. So this is the one that has functionality specific to SQL Server. So how do you know the dependencies? So if you come down here on your screen here, you'll see the dependency. So it is dependent to Microsoft.EntityFrameworkCore.Relational. So you'll just click here, then you'll be able to see the versions. So we have the versions of the releases. So you can actually use the latest stable version. So if you install it, then that is it. For mine, you can see this is the latest one, so I can actually update it. Then you accept the license terms. That is it. So if you now do that, you can also do the same. So after you have installed that, we have actually installed now the Entity Framework Core to interact with SQL database. So we install the Entity Framework Core.SQL. So this package is usually called the database provider package. So this is the one that is called database provider package. So if you are using a different database other than SQL Server, then you'll need to install the database provider specific Nugget package. For example, if you want to use the MySQL as your database, then you install. So we have the one that is recommended. So we have Pomelo dot. This is for MySQL Entity Framework. Sorry. Entity Framework dot MySQL. So I'll be looking for that specific. Yeah, there it is. So it is pomelo.entityframeworkcore.mysql. So that is the one specific to MySQL. So along the same lines, if you are using PostgreSQL as your database, then you use np, and so we'll be changing here to np gsql.entityframeworkcore.postgre. SQL. So there we have it. So this is the Nugget package specific to PostgreSQL. So you can actually find all these packages on the MSDN page that I showed you before for the database providers. So once you install these Nugget packages, you can actually see them on the Install tab. So you'll just need to clear that. Then you will see all those Nugget packages that you have installed here. And for you to get it again, you can also see it under dependencies, then packages, then you're able to see them installed there. So this is so I've shown you how to install them from the application side. So you can also do this from the Nugget package manager. So for you to get that, you come here to tools, then we have the Nugget package manager, then package manager console. So it will give you a console for you to actually now run the command. So you can actually now do the install package manager command, package, install package, then you give the name of the nugget. So that is how you install it. So this is how you install Nugget packages and the database providers. So this is all about installation of Entity Framework Core to our application. So on our next video, we are going to discuss the DB context class in Entity Framework Core. And this one will now be able to see how we will be able to generate the tables and using the code first approach. So that is it, guys, for our today's video. Remember to subscribe, share, and comment down below. So see you in our next video.